Welcome back to the Street Photography Magazine podcast. I'm Bob Patterson, founder of Street Photography Magazine. Our editor is with us today. Although she's not our editor anymore, she's our publisher. Someday I'm going to get this right. And that's Ashley Rifo. And our guest, who's going to be chiming in very soon, is James Choi. He's a professor in Chicago. And a filmmaker. By the way, he's at DePaul University. So, but welcome, James. How are you?
Awesome. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Bob, Ashley. Really, really an honor to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. James was introduced to us by a publishing company, Trope. We've interviewed a number of people who've published with them. We have a lot of respect for them and their work and the quality of the people they recommend to us. So, and we had a preview of his book. We'll talk about that. It's pretty cool, I got to say. So, James, well, wait a minute. Let me just back up a little bit. I have not talked to Ashley in a while. I've been traveling. She's been traveling. So, what's going on, Ashley? What's happening down there in Florida?
Not too much. Doing good. Getting ready for a trip to Argentina that is long overdue. So, yeah, just busy.
Yeah, fun down there. Don't get the hantavirus while you're at it.
Yes. My husband has long warned me about this virus.
Really?
Since I've known him, actually, because it's always been a thing kind of where he's from.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so now it's... If I was tired of hearing about it before, I'm about to get really tired of hearing about it.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe it'll be over by the time you get down there.
Hopefully it'll be over by the time this podcast comes out in a couple months. Unlikely, but we can hope. One more thing, Bob, that I wanted to say was just kind of coincidental and interesting about talking to James right now is probably a couple weeks, maybe less, before Lauren at Trope reached out to me with James' work in the book. Someone had emailed us and said, "Hi, I'm a new subscriber. I really love the magazine. Do you have anything on South Korea? Because I'm traveling there soon and I'm excited to go." And I was thinking about it. I couldn't think of anything. I know we had a couple things, but I looked it up and we really don't have a lot of work that has come to us from South Korea. We have an upcoming article actually, but it was kind of like perfect timing and really nice to be able to talk to somebody who has been in South Korea recently. Also, you have a history with South Korea and also just with the viewpoint of being a street photographer there. So I'm excited to talk to you today, James, because, a lot of people are traveling. People travel more now, and a lot of street photographers wonder what they can do in South Korea, what it's like. So it's great to have you on. It's perfect timing.
Yeah, I may give you an article.
Awesome.
I was just there. I was in Busan, and I really liked it. Although my neighbor, who's from Seoul, I told him I was going there. He goes, "No, you have to go to Seoul." I can't. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Anyway, so James, welcome. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, of course.
And so what's going on up there in Chicago? At DePaul, is graduation over now?
Yeah, I mean we're winding down the school year, which is always sort of an interesting time, especially as an adult. Looking forward to summer break, which is a very sort of weird thing to sort of experience again as an adult. But looking forward to that, and obviously we're winding down, so weather's churning, Chicago's coming alive. It's a very sort of dual bipolar city, changes so much from the winter to the summer. I mean, it's almost like you wouldn't even recognize it. So I'm definitely sensing the energy come up and excited to head into summer here.
Yeah, for sure. And that town doesn't last too long.
No, our summers have definitely gotten shorter.
Yeah, that's for sure. So I don't know where to start because you've done so many interesting things. we're going to talk about your book, but before we get into that, why don't we talk about your film work? You are a filmmaker, and I was just, when I was looking through your background and everything, I saw that you had recently finished a film, if I'm correct on the timing, Before the Call.
Yep.
And independent film, obviously. And we talk a lot about visual storytelling, but making a film, it's all about storytelling. And I wonder if you could tell us, how did that project come together?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I wish it was all about storytelling. I don't know if that's necessarily true, Bob, about film or anything really. But yeah, so I had a sabbatical at DePaul, and I was planning on going to make a film in Korea of a script that I had called All Things Considered. It wasn't Before the Call. And so I had gone out to Korea with basically no money, but just simply the intention of making this movie feature. I was going to go there and just sort of figure it out and hopefully make some connections. And I went out there with that script, and while I was there, I was out location scouting, doing all the sort of pre-groundwork. And I was there for 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a long trip. And so I was there, I went out there with that script, but that script ended up selling. So it ended up being a finalist for a Blacklist to be commission initiative. And so near like a month before I was gonna sort of try to make that other film, it sold. And so I pivoted at that point and came up with Before the Call sort of before I came back in the last like sort of 2 months of my stay there. So it was a really quick turnaround.
Wow.
And it was sort of, I felt like I knew the city enough. I had met enough people through sort of the pre-production of that other film, and wanted to come back with something. And so, yeah, so we dove into that, and it was just a lot of the things I was feeling, and obviously a lot of the walkarounds, and the photography work that I was doing there, helped tremendously in sort of shaping the story in terms of the visual language and the locations that I wanted to shoot at.
That was the first time you'd been back to Korea since your childhood, right?
And that was the first time I've been back. So it was, my parents immigrated here in 78. I was 6, and hadn't gone back. So it was 44, like 46 years, I think.
Wow.
So it was wild. Yeah, it was wild to go back and, just reconnect in that way. So that experience in itself was, so many things coming out of that. I have a new film that revolves around that sort of experience as well, along with Before the Call. So
the essay that you wrote for the book really struck me. I mean, first of all, I mean, it's so well written. Obviously, being a professor, of course, you probably have to be an excellent writer. But I was reading, as I was reading it, and you talked about as a young child. And I think this is gonna connect with the movie as well here. But as a young child, you talk about playing in your parents' dry cleaners, and you talked about the smell of the chemicals. My dad had a dry cleaner when I was young, and as soon as I read those words, I could smell what my dad always called the solvent. I don't know what it was. Some
Yeah,
chemical they use to clean. It's probably going to kill all of us.
for sure. So
And it didn't do my parents any good, that's for sure.
yeah,
But I could smell that smell. And I hadn't been in there since I was a little kid. And I thought, wow, you've got, you know, you've got a way with words to be able to do that to say somebody, to be able to recall a smell from 60 plus years before.
yeah, 50 years. I mean, it was a very sort of impactful sort of experience, obviously coming to a place, and times were different back then. I can't imagine. I have a 6-year-old right now. I can't imagine her running around the city on public transportation by herself. But back then, that's what we were doing, right? So jumping on the bus, walking around the city, just exploring, and just being on my own, and going to my parents' store often, is definitely is definitely a part of my memory and experience that is definitely hard to forget.
And the reason you were back in Korea after all those years was to look into making that other film, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think my work's been a lot more sort of, as I've opened up sort of into sort of becoming more vulnerable with my work, I think I've started to sort of look inward and start to sort of explore and question sort of my origins, my heritage, and sort of where I'm from. And so a lot of those things led me to writing the first script, All Things Considered, that sort of led me there. But yeah, I mean, that was sort of what took me there. But I think it was coming. I mean, it's crazy that I hadn't gone back in 46 years. I mean, I love to travel. I've been to many, many different parts of the world, but just not to Seoul or not to Korea.
Yeah, that's funny. I assume you still have family there.
Saw a family there, which that experience was crazy. I mean, all of my dad's side's there, and I hadn't seen them in 46 years. And not only not seen them, but just communicated really with them. So it was just like, just meeting them for the first time or going to dinner and just having this sort of idea. I mean, again, very, very brief memories and images of who they were. But obviously 46 years later, we're completely different people, almost strangers in many ways.
Sure. Sure. Are you still fluent in the language?
Yeah. I can definitely get by. I unfortunately can't read or write. I'm sure I could learn how to do that fairly quickly, but yeah, I can speak the language. I speak Korean to my parents still.
Oh,
my mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was different than what you expected, and what was the same? Like, were there things that were the same as you remembered, or was it just like a completely different place?
Yeah, I mean, as you guys may or may not know, I mean, Korea's gone through an incredible transformation, obviously, from 78 to now. I mean, literally coming out from poverty to, a global leading economic, cultural sort of country right now. And so it was completely different in an unimaginable way. But as I mentioned in the book, I mean, I think there was something about sort of the feeling. And I think that's what struck me the most. Just sort of having set aside that sort of past and my heritage in that way, just growing up here, and then going back. And so a lot of it felt visually, it was completely different. Didn't know much about it. I probably knew about it as much as, most people around the world in terms of their sort of pop influence. And so going back, it was just, it was wild to see how different it was in terms of what I imagined it would be. But the feelings and the smells and the sort of, I don't know, it was just a sense of comfort that you feel, I think. And I think you feel that as a lot of immigrants might, or just people who, to just be in a place where you're not the other, right? Like here, I was a Korean kid. And obviously just, there's a lot of differences just even from a pure aesthetic standpoint. But then you go there and, when everyone, I mean, it's a very homogenous country as well. So when everybody looks like you, that's a feeling that was incredibly sort of both comforting, very new, but also comforting. And it was really interesting to sort of feel that and feel this sort of comfort and familiarity of that. That was always sort of there coming out.
I remember Richard Pryor, the comedian, and he's African American, and he said basically the same thing about when he first went to Africa.
Sure.
And it's hard for us to relate to that feeling since, here everybody looks like us. Well, actually, not quite, but but yeah, certainly in Asia, everybody's got dark hair.
Mm-hmm.
I know my husband's from Argentina, and we met when we were both living in Bolivia. But, Argentina and Bolivia are close enough so that I was mostly the one that got stared at by everybody in Bolivia. And
Totally.
when we finally went to, and, here he doesn't look that different from anybody here. So, he doesn't get stared at here either. But when we went to Asia for a trip, we spent a few months in Vietnam. And then everyone was staring at him, and he's like, everyone's staring at me. And I was like, now you know how it feels.
There you go.
Finally.
For sure.
It's a strange feeling. And that's super interesting to think about you having been here basically your whole life.
Yeah.
And then finally going back to a place where you're one of the crowd and you don't, people aren't making assumptions about you just because of how you look. That's really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. We had gone to China, to Beijing, 20 years ago now. My daughter lived there. She was a journalist there. We went to visit her about 9 months after she moved there. My wife is blonde. And everywhere we go, people are taking our picture, or they're stopping her and wanting to pose with her. And my daughter said, "You're going to be in a lot of family albums." Because
for sure.
They didn't care much about me, but they sure liked taking her photo, which I don't blame them.
That's really fascinating to think about, that just being on the opposite side of that, not having a lone experience of going somewhere and people looking at you, but like belonging here and having people still make assumptions about you, and then going back to where all your relatives are. And that's really interesting to think about. How did you feel after having been there, experienced that, and then coming back to the States again? I mean, were you even aware of how that would feel?
No. I mean, I think not truly, right? So I think going and experiencing that, was huge, was transformative in many ways, and just made me think a lot about just my own life and question a lot of things, I think. So coming back it was great. Again, like I said, a lot of my art, a lot of my work has been looking inwards, has been sort of being vulnerable to who I am. And I think a lot of that raised those questions. I mean, do I think that I came back as a different person? I mean, it's probably not that extreme, but it did raise more questions, and it did raise more curiosity, and it definitely raised a sense of connection and wanting. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of my work since coming back, it's been 1.5 years now, has been both on the film side and on with this book, is definitely geared towards all of that, those thematic ideas for sure.
So when you were doing street photography or really any photography in Seoul, so were you doing it from a perspective of as an outsider, like we would if we were there visiting, or did
probably? I mean, I don't know, right? I can't say, but I will say though that this book, and sort of what Sam and Trope has put together, feels much more personal, at least. I mean, and street photography is in a lot of ways, right? Because it's not really sort of, it's not really, I mean, it could be categorized as such, but I guess it sort of falls in an interesting category in that way, that it's not necessarily a travel photography book. Because the images aren't necessarily, here's what Seoul looks like. But it's more sort of like, here's what Seoul feels like. And again, I think that goes to sort of, I'm new to sort of the street photography world, but I just feel like that's sort of what drew me to that, is this sort of sense of capturing a time and a space and a feeling. And so, yeah, I mean, I thought the street photography side of things as I was going along was in capturing sort of oh, here's a cool tourist monument, or here's a cool
Yeah.
tourist spot. It was more just like just being so taken by sort of the daily routines and just like the lives of these people, right? And this place that I came from. And so I think that sort of definitely influenced and impacted in sort of what I was shooting and how I was moving around the city. Um, and that to say, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but photography and just art in general for me is a lot of it is instinctive. It's not like I'm really thinking about like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, as I go along. I think I do that in retrospect and I can see sort of the choices that I made or the images that I took. But in the moment, I'm just sort of, you know, basically being present and observing and sort of taking photos of things that feel connective and interesting to me.
One of the things I like about the book a lot is how towards the end, it's kind of divided into sections based on Korean words that don't necessarily have a very literal translation in English.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. Do you have a favorite? Is one of those words your favorite, like Korean word that you can't, there's not a perfect word for it in English?
Well, I think one of the words that the book opens with, nunchi, is
Mm.
it's sort of this idea of being able to read the room or being able to sort of read your surroundings. And I think there's something interesting about, I mean, that word really speaks to me because I feel like I've sort of used that word or that was a part of sort of my childhood and growing up in a place that didn't feel completely foreign or that felt like where I was sort of on the outside, or perceived as as the other, I guess. And so that word is really interesting to me. And I, you know, obviously Sam did a great job of sort of diving into sort of the meaning behind that. But I think that's a word that's definitely lived inside me, as with, you know, the photos and this experience that maybe I didn't quite fully realize before the trip and before putting this project together.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah. What's the backstory behind how this came together? Um, it's from the work I've seen that Trope publishes. They're typically monographs, but this is an anthology where there's three of you, right? Who produced the work for the book. How did that happen? I mean, and how did you happen to become part of the project?
Sure. I mean, you know, I've been dabbling in photography for the past couple of years now. Um, it's just really become an extension in terms of its connection to cinema, um, in still form. And so I've been taking a lot, and again, as I mentioned, I've been really drawn to street photography in particular. Um, and so I've been taking a lot of photos just on my own, no sort of expectations, um, posting on social, and Sam, the publisher and, at Trope, had a connection to a colleague of mine at DePaul who had been liking some of the photos that I've been posting, and somehow that landed on his feed, and so he found that we had a mutual connection, and then had reached out, and we happened to be in Seoul at the same time.
Mm.
And so he had reached out and we had connected and gone out, and he was telling me about just sort of also coming to Korea more. He had grown up there and spent time there as a young child as well. And he had been coming and exploring and sort of being moved by Seoul in very similar ways. So we had met, talked, and he had talked about doing a book, some sort of book on Seoul, and wanted, and we had talked about collaborating on that. And then that all sort of came to a head, and here we are today with this beautiful book.
So
Did you guys collaborate? Did you have like a brief, like you have to take pictures of this, this, and that? Or did you just say, be free and then come together and look at all the photos and see what worked together?
Totally. And I think he was, you know, I think, you know, it was just more about our experience of being there, you know, because again, we share that experience of not having been to this place, for so long. and sort of like taking in the moment and seeing what that produces. And I think he was really interested in that. And so there was no sort of guidance. It was just more like, I'm really loving the photos that you're taking and the perspective that you have. And I think he was going on a very similar journey. There's a lot of Sam's photos in there as well. And so, it was just a matter of sort of them once they had looked at the photos and sort of doing a really great job of curating and editing this book.
Your body of work that you created in Seoul. I mean, how much of it, in terms of the book, how much of it was already done before you connected with Sam, and how much did you do after after you talked about the book and decided to work on it with them?
Again, I had no sort of intentions or going in. I feel like a lot of the sort of suffering I've watched in creative work, and have experienced myself, is just getting, it comes from this idea of sort of trying to control the outcomes, and really focusing on sort of the reception and how people are going to perceive things. And I really went into this without any of that. And so, it was really, our conversations were, just as I said, him sort of being moved by sort of the photos I was taking, thinking about certain elements. So I was, through my trip and the experience of the photos that I had taken, my work in that sense was done. I wasn't going back to sort of then think about sort of the marketing elements or what elements might be missing or what people might want. None of that stuff. And so, it was really, at that point, my work was done. And then it was about sort of, what Sam and the publishing company, Trope, had in mind in terms of with their editors and thinking in terms of like how this all sort of organically fits. And again, I thought they did a beautiful job with that.
Did you send them a batch of photos and then they made the choices as to what's in, what's out, how it's sequenced? And then, and were you involved in that process at all?
No, not really. I sent them obviously some selects that had moved me. But again, I think overall, you can see a very sort of clear, pattern and themes that were coming out of the photos. I think just where my headspace was at and how I was feeling and where I was emotionally, really that through line sort of comes through. And so, I sent them some selects of things that jumped out at me, and then they sort of moved forward from there.
So you're right. You didn't really have to suffer at all with this project.
No.
This was an easy one.
You're lucky.
This was like, this was one of the best. Like, this was so unbelievably smooth and easy on my end. Again, Trope and Sam and his team, they did such an amazing job of curating and putting this together in this beautiful package. But for me, it was purely experiential and visceral, and none of the hard stuff on the back end.
So you've worked both ways. Do you think that it makes the work better or worse, or does it matter when you are thinking about trying to achieve a final outcome? Like you're making a film, you're thinking about what it has to be at the end to succeed, quote unquote.
Yeah.
I mean, does that make the work worse when you're worrying about that? Or what do you think? How does it affect the process?
I mean, I think it definitely impacts it, right? I think it's hard to avoid, especially in our world. And if I relate that to film, obviously the commercialism of film. And again, this is very, I mean, this may come from, or sound sort of coming from, a very sort of privileged standpoint, in terms of how do we make art, and how do we make this a sort of sustainable career for ourselves, right? And so when you think about that other part has to play some factor. But again, I mean, I've been doing this across the board on the film side of things, and and getting into photography or the visual medium of art for the past 30 years. So I put in a lot of time. But I do believe that at the end of the day, the things that are going to speak the most outside of the commercialism and the commercial sort of form that film and perhaps photography has become, at least in the United States, is that the things that are going to speak to people and connect are the ones that ultimately are truly authentic. And authenticity is really sort of the foundational base for, I mean, and this isn't, anything new. It's just you realize the longer you do this, how important and how universal authenticity is. You can chase trends about thinking about what people want, or you can think about truly being vulnerable, authentic, and honest. And if you could hit that point, like, it's gonna have an audience without you thinking about why or how they're going to like it. And so, yeah, I mean, that was a long lesson, having spent 20 years in Hollywood and thinking from a marketing commercial standpoint, where I'm always thinking about trends or thinking about what people want. And then again, as I said, in the many recent years that I've been back in Chicago and really becoming more and more perceptive about my vulnerabilities and looking inward, I think that part of my work has, I think, been reflective in the way that people have been receiving it, in a way that's very different from when I was totally thinking from the other end.
So tell us about a little bit about your career in Hollywood. What's your background in working in, I guess, feature films?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up as with immigrant parents. So, art, creative field was not discussed, was not mentioned. It was
That's
not
a
even
no-go.
yeah, it's a no-go. Like, I didn't even know it existed. Honestly, I had no idea even what the film industry was. I just happened to go to school out west. I mean, with the thoughts that I was going to go to law school, go into politics. I mean, I spent a lot of time during college. I was a political science major, didn't study film or the arts, and spent time in DC. And then when I graduated, I was going to study for my LSAT and go to law school in a year or two. But I was living out in LA, and obviously the industry is hard to avoid when you're there. I started to understand sort of the impact of what the business part of the industry was. And that was appealing to me, coming from a very idealistic political sort of perspective of wanting to change the world. And the more I learned about it, I was like, okay, this is interesting. This is politics in some ways, or the impact that can be just as great. But it comes from a creative angle. And so I dove into it, and spent, almost 20 years out there working in the industry, from starting at 8 talent agencies to, working in the first .com boom, back to the independent side of film, until I finally moved back to Chicago. And then I've been back for 16 years now, and it's been a complete, full, obsession and focus on independent filmmaking and what that means. And ultimately, it just came down to, what are the biggest obstacles in making film? And just like anything else, it was money. And so my sort of process coming back was, is there a way to eliminate money in this process? And so I've been making really small, micro budgeted films, that that have been told is impossible to do, that you can't make films that way, or you can't make films without X amount of dollars. And I've been sort of trying to go against that, and have been finding a tremendous amount of success in the last 16 years in doing that. And part of that is the output, right? Because when you don't have money as a boundary, you can make so much more. Whether they're good or not, or whether they're received well or not, is one thing, but you can make a lot more. And I think those two things have a correlation, and photography, again, is one of those things where you're not limited by that, right? You're not limited by, I mean, if you have a camera, and everybody does in their pockets now through their phones, but even regardless, I mean, you can go out and it's an individual art form and sort of capturing that image. And there's a very close correlation to photography and film in that they're both telling stories. They're both image based. And I think the one thing photography was doing that film hadn't caught up to was this idea that you can do it without money. And I'm sort of incorporating both of those ideas. And I think people who watch my film sort of will understand sort of my style and the way that I shoot. A lot of static frames, that allows sort of the story to unfold within a frame as opposed to depending upon sort of all the different coverages and edits and visual effects and all those other things that film has become in Hollywood.
Did practicing, because I know you said you're kind of new to doing like street photography and even stills, did practicing that help you arrive at the simplified kind of filmmaking?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And I think they kind of went hand in hand because I was dabbling in photography just throughout my whole life because the visual medium was really interesting to me. It just, when that light bulb went off where I was like, wait a minute, like if you can take a beautiful photography and have a beautiful frame and let the story like moving images unfold within that frame, like why wouldn't that be effective? And obviously masters have been doing this from the start of film, as cinema. And it was just a matter of sort of diving into that without sort of the constraints of, can I do this if I have no money? And I think once you get over that sort of fear or those sort of messaging that we've been told that you can't, you start to discover the possibilities and you start to discover what's actually possible.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Is there any one film, whether it's an independent film or a feature film, that street photographers should really see and study to train their eye or to give them inspiration in their own work? And anything come to mind that?
I mean, if you get outside of the Hollywood system, and you were mentioning this earlier about sort of like wanting to get back into watching more independent film, I think if you start to get outside of the system and even get into Asia and Europe, I had the incredible sort of privilege and honor to study under masterful filmmakers, Apichatpong from Thailand and Abbas Kiarostami from Iran. And they're both heavily, heavily influenced by photography and just imagery. And so, any of their works obviously will have a tremendous influence for photographers in terms of what's possible. But they were a huge, huge influence, and their films just continue to impact me in terms of what cinema can be in sort of its minimalist form.
I saw you once in your writing, you mentioned an Ozu.
Yeah, for sure. And Ozu is another huge influence. He was a huge influence in making Before the Call. Just was studying a lot of his work and his approach in terms of like how I wanted to approach that. Again, this all comes to a head in terms of the limitations I have, right? In terms of time, coverage, money. And when I watch his work, and watch sort of the simplicity of his work from a technical standpoint, it really becomes sort of the blueprint for how I approach my stuff under those circumstances. And as they say, like in art and in general, like I think people tend to sort of mistake bigness or something being interesting as being complicated. And truly, the hardest thing is to be simple. And if you can sort of tap into understanding what that is, and how that is sort of encapsulated in the ultimate art form, you can do some amazing, amazing things, again, that break you free from the limitations we've been placed with.
So how do you do that? Pay attention, obviously, but
yeah, I mean, just awareness, right?
Yeah,
just being aware from both a story ideation standpoint, from perspective, and awareness is and presence is everything. I know it sounds so simple and so dumb, and we hear it all the time, and sort of the whole, new age spiritualism world. And it's lost its sort of impact because it's thrown around so loosely. But the real essence of the simplicity of being present and being aware it can't be underestimated.
I think people are kind of becoming aware of it too. I think you're right that it kind of lost its impact for a time, but I think you can kind of see even in younger generations who, are saying, I don't want to start a smartphone. I'm going to use a flip phone or
For
things like that
sure.
because just, we're so distracted. There's so many things pulling at us all the time that I think it does make some people aware of the need to just be present and be able to focus and be with another person and have a connection with another person face to face.
For sure.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's those, but those are all skills that must be
yeah,
learned, right?
yeah, for sure. And you have to sort of train yourself. You have to like get into that. Yeah. You have to learn that skill set because we've all sort of gone off the deep end with technology and it's really hard to break the distractions that's in front of us all the time. For sure.
I'm so fascinated to hear you talk about limiting yourself to improve as a filmmaker, because this is a principle that has been talked about a lot in the photography world and in the street photography world too. Limit yourself to one lens, limit yourself
Totally.
to one settings configuration to produce better, with the goal of producing better work. So
Yeah.
I find that fascinating that you're saying the same thing about filmmaking, and maybe that's a principle we could apply to just about everything in life.
For sure. Everything in light and for sure in the visual medium of art, right? I think I don't know. It's really hard. And again, that definition maybe is sort of loose too, but the idea of what art is and that film has somehow, at least in the States, sort of moved away. Like film isn't considered art. Like cinema is not considered art. It's so like people look at film so differently from photography or paintings. Um, and it's like, it's really not, and most of the world looks at cinema as art and most of the world looks at film as art. And, again, it's just about a matter of sort of broadening that definition and looking outward a little bit outside of like what we've been constrained by in Hollywood.
So did you, when you made your own photography work, particularly in Korea or even, around Chicago, do you typically work with just same lens, one body?
I have.
Yeah.
I mean, the Soul Book was shot on the Ricoh.
Oh, really?
Which was
nice.
unbelievably, unbelievably liberating. I mean, just in terms of both size, and just, as they say, like the best camera is the one you have on you. And, I can't agree more with that, having experienced the Ricoh. So now I'm all like, I'm all about fixed lenses. I've had multiple sort of cameras that have interchangeable lenses, but I'm okay with the 28 now. After I used Ricoh all summer, or that during that 6 months, like I'm so in love and all about the 28, and it's like that's all I need, honestly. And I feel like I could get everything.
So, do you have any tips or any insights into what it's like to do street photography in South Korea or Seoul, and where someone might go, or anything like that?
Oh man. Well, first of all, from a technical legal standpoint, which I wasn't totally aware of, I don't know if I believe street photography isn't necessarily um sort of widely accepted. So you just want to be respectful, I think, ultimately in terms of doing that. And I guess that's true everywhere. But in terms of where to go and whatnot, I mean, honestly, like if you just walk, it's so incredibly just vibrant in every element. And again, as we talked about earlier, if you just commit to being present, like literally your doorstep is going to be fascinating and interesting. Like there's like every corner, every block, every what I wouldn't advise is necessarily, again, chasing any sort of TikTok trends or tourist, friendly spots.
Yeah.
That you don't need to do that to fully experience from a photographic, from a visual standpoint and experience. You do not need to have any of that, and you will be floored by what you are given when you're just simply present.
Just walk out the door then.
Walk out the door. Yeah. Have a camera on you that you can carry with you all day.
So now you didn't look like a tourist though. Did that work against your favor as you're shooting people in the street in a place where it may not be legal?
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's that was like the brilliance of the Rico is like, I didn't realize how small it is and how inconspicuous, and that really nobody, like, it's literally more, it's just as nondescript as your phone, if not even more in certain cases, but the quality is so good. And there is a tremendous amount of like liberation and power in that, right? Because I mean, if you have a big camera, it gets tenuous just across the board, not only for yourself, but for others. And so, it's amazing. I love that camera.
I'm trying to think of how to ask this question because I've been struggling with it myself. But when for example, I came back from this big trip to Japan. We were traveling with some other people we had never met, and I'm making a book for them. And I've got thousands of photos, of course, and I'm trying to make my final selections, and I'm thinking, do I just choose things that I really like? I see other photos. Oh, I think Steve's going to like this photo, or he's going to really like this one because his wife is in it. And I'm going back and forth between that. Is it just my vision, or do I try to please these people who I've gotten to like and traveled with? How do I make that cut? Say, screw it. It's all my vision, and if they don't like it, too bad.
I mean, if you're asking me, I would say for sure, Bob. Like, I mean, clearly they want to make a book or are responding to you and your work for a reason.
Yeah.
They believe in your instincts or they believe in your eye. So, again, going back to what we've talked about, I mean, to me, it's really at that point, what's moving for you. And whatever is moving for you for the reasons that they are is going to speak to them in some way. I think catering, if you cater to them because they're in it or whatever reasons that you have, I think you're compromising sort of a lot of the sort of integrity of what you have. I mean, for me, because I'm sure all of it's beautiful. And then it's just a matter of like the thing that you see that only you can see is going to be the things that they want to see as well. And that's why they're collaborating and working with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I needed that. Thank you.
I liked what you said earlier, James, about your photos from Korea being more about how the place, being more about how it felt than how it looked.
Yeah, for sure.
And that seems like something you could use to guide a selection too. Like what's speaking to how it felt versus just what I saw.
Because if that makes you feel that way, I think that's super, super important. For sure.
You're a good advice giver, James.
You are. Well, he's
come back to you when we need advice.
He's a professor. He's a,
Yeah, I should look into teaching as a career, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Advise some young students.
All right. Before we started, I told you I'm going to ask you this question. I've never forewarned anybody on a question, but anyway, independent films. And just as I said, in the last couple of days, after looking what you're working on, and a woman here in my town, and can you recommend any specific films, independent films that everybody that have influenced you, and everybody should definitely take some time to watch? Two
Sure.
or
I mean,
three.
and
Yeah.
again, that's a really obviously tough question.
Yeah.
It'd be like asking a photographer what's their favorite photo. But
Don't ask that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I can share with you a film I saw recently that's impacted me and I thought was
Sure.
incredibly impactful, and the movie is called Surat. Um, and it's one of those films that emotionally sort of moved me, right? It's a very visceral film. It'll make you feel something. And it's a beautiful film about a father who looks for his lost daughter at a rave in the Moroccan desert. Um, and then a lot of things happen there. But in terms of from a sonic music standpoint, from story standpoint, and the way that the filmmaker sort of carries you through, it'll be hard not to feel something there. And this is coming from, and maybe it had a bigger impact on me as a father of a 6-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, I feel like it'll have a visceral sort of emotional impact regardless.
So how do you spell Sarat? Sarat?
Sirat.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to find it and watch it.
For sure. It's on streaming now.
Oh, that's even better. Well, good. What else? What else is coming up for you? Anything new we need to know about?
The movie is playing. It's playing in Austin, Texas, and Los Angeles in June, at film festivals there. And then obviously, Soul Days and Nights will be released in June. Super excited about that. And then, that'll hopefully carry us through to the end of the year. And I'll have releasing that movie as well. And then just planning my new films, for the end of the year.
So, how do you get into a film festival?
Gatekeeping, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and the numbers are staggeringly, it's staggering. I think I looked up, and I looked up the statistics to get into Sundance, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you look at the acceptance rate, like, and seems pretty simple, but like your chances of getting into a car accident are greater.
Oh,
so
that's comforting.
Yeah. So anything beyond that, I mean, it's short of buying a lotto ticket at that point, in certain instances. And so, yeah, I mean, but again, I am a believer, and to a certain degree, a big chunk of it is who you know, a big chunk of it is the work. I've had films at premiere festivals like South by Southwest and Sundance and stuff without knowing people and having won. So it's possible. It's just, again, the only way you're going to be able to do it or even have a chance is to create, right? I mean, everyone's got ideas and potential and all that other stuff, but nothing happens until you create, and then getting it in people's faces, even if the odds are long. But it's challenging. But I think a lot of that gatekeeping stuff is slowly disappearing. Obviously, the empowerment of the youth and just people through social media and the capabilities that we have to build an audience ourselves without any gatekeeping, where those things become irrelevant or not as relevant. You can have a film that reaches a lot of people without playing at major festivals. And that's unprecedented. That sort of opportunity for a filmmaker has never existed in the past. And the fact that people are now doing it and releasing movies in theaters on their own. I mean, that Mark Plyer example, I think he released a movie and made on his own in theaters and made like 35 million or 35 million opening weekend for a movie that costs like, $1 million to make. So that's astronomical. And we've seen that obviously with Taylor Swift and other people who are she's Taylor Swift, but she's still breaking the system of depending upon studios that she's like, I have a huge fan base. I can go put this in theaters myself.
Sure.
Well, independent artists are doing that on their own now. And obviously it's just about scale and perspective at that point. And what is success? Like, if you make $1 million, is that good? I mean, I would say it is, but we've gotten caught up where we're like, well, if you don't make 20 million, then it's not successful, or like the numbers get so skewed. So as long as you have perspective, the audience is caught up. So it opens up a lot of avenues outside of both festivals or anything else, really.
That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear your perspective on things coming from a filmmaker's world.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really excited. I mean, I'm planning to self-distribute my film before the call at the end of the year once it goes through the festival circuit. So hopefully create awareness throughout the year, and then I'll be releasing it on my own at the end of the year. So hopefully people show up. And again, the stakes are so low for this movie in terms of my process, how much money actually goes into making the movie. So again, the possibilities of return and success are much easier to attain.
I like
So
that.
where can people find your films and find more about you and follow along?
Yeah, if they can, most of my stuff is on Instagram. So at JCPOV on Instagram, and all my film stuff and photography stuff is all on there. I just use that basically as my website to get work out. So please follow me, and you'll hear about all the new stuff coming out.
Nice and simple.
Nice and simple. Yep.
Okay. Well, thanks, James. I'm really glad we connected.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Bob, Ashley, for having me. It was really fun. It's great. Thanks for supporting art.